Hello, my dear friends. This is Adli Abouzeedan again, welcoming you in a new lecture of mine in the Universal Inspirations set of lectures. This is really a very special lecture in which I'm attempting to reflect some of my thoughts about happiness. And when I was planning this lecture, I thought of how I'll approach this thing. And again, it will not be an academic lecture. It will be really mostly reflections of my own conclusions in life, my own experiences, and the kind of things I reached to after all these years. And the lecture will be divided into two parts. The first part will be just reflections on the definition of happiness itself, how we define happiness. And then the second part will be about how we attain happiness, how we really reach happiness. And I'm just writing some things because really, I do not have any structure yet. I was thinking how I'm going to approach this on my way to this nice place. It's Christmas time in Sweden. Very nice, relaxing time. And maybe this is the best time really to record lecture about this thing. So let's begin. The first part will be about, some my own reflections on happiness. I have been a person who have been trying for long years to really attain happiness. And I grew up in the circumstances, in a set of conditions, which made that question very urgent on my soul. And these circumstances, they are related to me in person, but they are related to the conditions in which I'm living. The personal conditions has to do with the personal things has to do with me, while the condition has to do with the setting I found myself in. I'll start by talking about generally the settings themselves, the conditions, and then I'll talk about the things which concern me personally. As I said before in many of my lectures, I am of Palestinian origin, and I was born in Gaza, 1955. And at that time, Gaza was a huge refugee camp. And as a very young infant, I really did not understand what's going on around me. All I knew from my family, from my parents, that we have lost our country and that we are living as refugees. And I remember from that period a lot of things related to struggling in life. I remember, for example, that at the beginning, people lived in tents, and there was nothing really for them to support. Although the United Nations did a great job, and many people helped. But the general conditions in Gaza at that time was really miserable. Huge number of refugees. Gaza was never a big city. It was only a small town located on the train line between that goes from through Palestine into the coasts of Sinai, the coastal areas of Sinai. But by that refugee influx, when all these thousands of people, 100,000 people came to the city, this small town, it exploded and became huge in numbers. And then the conditions were miserable at the beginning. And that created me a sense of the value of having things. It implemented in me a deep realization that in life, sometimes you don't understand or you don't value things until you lose them. So I grew up with that sense of losing the basics in life. And that impacted me a lot later on and made me value everything I get in life, really. So these early days, these early years in Gaza were really a kind of experimenting a little bit with my understanding of life at that very, very early age. I mean, I only stayed 5 years in that context in Gaza from 55 to 60. But as an infant, I saw what does it mean when you have to go to schools which are very crowded, that doesn't have facilities, that you struggle for everything you do at a very early age in my life. And I still remember all of these pictures of people suffering and the way people struggle to fix their own necessities. And I also remember very nice things. One of the things I remember is that there were Swedish United Nations peace observers in the region, in Gaza area itself. And for me, this, was like, it's an amazing thing for me. Those men were like men from the outer space with their blonde hair and blue eyes. And they were very nice. And I still remember the blue dress that they had. Well, at least the hats were blue. That is what is in my mind. And then I went to Kuwait with my father. I was 5 years old. And in Kuwait, I lived as a refugee. Now, when I say these things, I really don't mean anything. I don't want to offend anybody. And it's not my business to discuss what is the wisdom of letting people living for tens of years in a country without giving them rights. The official Arab policy is that they did not want to settle us in their countries because they want to keep the Palestinian issue alive. That's what they say. Personally, I don't believe in that. Really. I think there were more domestic things that is kind of shaped these policies. It doesn't have to do with supporting the Palestinian people. It has to do with keeping things in control in the different countries, including Kuwait. And I'm not saying that because I have any bad feelings in myself, inside my heart, I love Kuwait, I love the Kuwaiti people, but I think that decision was not just because as a person, I have been impacted. When you live in a country all your life, I lived in Kuwait from 55 and from 1960, until I left in 1984. It's about more than 24 years in that country. And I always wondered why cannot get my rights? Why cannot be a Kuwaiti citizen? And I remember one time when I said that to one of the Kuwaiti people, one of the Kuwaiti colleagues of mine who worked with me in Kuwait Institute for Scientific Research, he got very mad on me. And he said that you should thank God that you have a job and you're living between us. And I did not say anything. I feel that the way he thinks is completely different from the way I think. And that environment where you feel yourself that as a body who doesn't have any belonging to the country, where you're living on the edge of the life and society, and where your ambitions and where desires to be something is blocked by the regulations. That hurts you, and it affects your norms. It affects your looking at happiness and how you value your life. And I struggled all these years when I was in Kuwait really to find a place for myself in life. Uh, and in that struggle, I was all the time wondering about, the meaning of these things, the meaning of life. Uh, how can I attain happiness? Why a passport is so important? What does it do to you when you feel that you are unable to move around? For example, just going for a simple vacation outside Kuwait for me wasn't an easy thing because I did not have any nationality. I had only a Palestinian traveling document, and I felt many times that I was not welcomed in many countries. And there's a lot of memories related to that. Just give you an example. One time in Kuwait University, we had been invited by the Iranian government. Was before the Khomeini time. We were invited to visit the university in Tehran, and we were happy for that. We thought that we were going to have some nice time there, and the university was willing. Kuwait University was willing to finance this trip. Then we got a disappointing letter from the Iranian embassy, which said in basic that because most of the groups were about 10 kids and girls, or 20 kids and girls, and most of us were Palestinians. That stage of Kuwait University built up. And the embassy told us that since most of you are Palestinians, you are not welcomed to our country. That's example of things that just shock you and make you somehow wonder, get you into the mode of very deep philosophical thinking about life, about justice, about the human conditions in general. And all these things really have built my understanding of happiness, and I'll be talking about that in the second part. I'm just trying to put you in the mindset of mine in relation to this very important issue. So I've been struggling all the time in Kuwait during that period of my life to really settle somehow and find a place for me in the world. And it was a tough struggle, a very tough struggle. It was a very stressing time for me. And that continued for many years. I even, when I went to the United States, I was hoping that I will find a new life there. Uh, I went uh, just quickly. Uh, the way my education saga, as you say, I finished my high school. I was born 1955. We moved to Kuwait 1960. I was uh, I was I finished my high school 1973, and then 1977 I finished my bachelor degree in chemistry. After that, I worked 2 years between 1977 to 1979, and what was occupying me all the time is to get out of this situation, which was an unhappy situation. It was stressing me. I wasn't really enjoying life. I was feeling living on the edge of life, and that's not my nature. I really want to be somebody who is able to contribute to life. Some people were content of what they get from Kuwait, from the Kuwaiti government, and they think that okay, you have good work, good salary, but you need more. And for some people, that was enough. I'm not claiming that people are not happy because of this, but I was not happy. My ambitions and my desires were far higher than that. And I don't blame anybody or overload anybody for that. I don't even load the Kuwaitis for that. What I say is that this situation is abnormal, and it impacts people very deeply. And maybe someday I will write a book about this, about my Humanian experience as a Palestinian, and what does it mean to be living without any belonging. And so, 79, I decided to go to the United States and pursue my education. I went there for 2 years. And I finished a degree in chemical engineering, 1981. But during this period, I was hoping that somehow I find place for myself. But nothing happened. I finished my education, and I was given the choice to go back to Kuwait, because the only way for me to complete my education was to go back and work again and get some money and try to go fair. Because that's how I did the first time. First time, education money that I spent between 1979 and 81, I saved them from my work after I finished my bachelor degree in chemistry. I worked in public schools and in the Kuwait University also for 2 years. From that money, I went to the United States. I want to read again, so I decided to go back to Kuwait, get some more money, and see if I can get out of this situation I am in. And I remember some really hot discussions with my father about these things. And I love my father, I respect him. But he's a traditional person. For him, being happy means that you have to accept certain things. We had a different view of happiness and justice. And I remember I told him that, my father really loved you and admire you. You're a great person. You did a lot. But doesn't mean that I have to accept what you have accepted in your life. Now later on, my father migrated to the United States and things changed. But at that period, he was not convinced at all of anything than just staying in Kuwait, even if our stay there was temporary. Then I had the chance to come to Sweden, continue my education. The only time when I felt that the conditions were really changed dramatically for me is in 1989. Or 90, excuse me, 90. Because when I finished my education, I applied for residency, and I got it in Sweden. And I remember that when I got the Swedish permanent residency, when I left the building, with that paper, I feel that now I have settled, now I have a country, now I have a place to belong to. Miss Muzi, excuse me, I write when I talk because the ideas are coming. I'm trying to. I did not prepare for this lecture. I'm just trying to kind of get it. I want it to be natural conversation. I don't want it to be academic. I want it to come from my heart. So it becomes just a spontaneous one. And for the first time, I felt really belonging. And it's amazing. I mean, I was still in 1990s, 1990. I was still having. I did not settle the citizenship issue, but I was at least at the first in the first stage. And I have a country now. I can settle in this country. And then the great thing came in 1939, 93, when I became Swedish citizen, and that was that was the first time where I felt that my feet are standing on solid ground. I know now which country I belong to. I am Swede. This is my country. This is the country I wish to live in. And this is the country I wish to give for. And this is the country that I would like to and hope that I will die in. And this is the country that I'm willing to give everything for, including my own life, to defend, because it gave me what I've been seeking all those years, a home. And that meant a lot to me. Now, the reason I'm talking about this context is because I want you to understand that happiness is very related to the contexts you are within, you are living within, and it shapes your philosophy about your happiness, shapes that. A person who has been living all the time in a rich family and he have the food all the time available for him, he will never feel the value of the little piece of meat he's putting in his mouth until he live in context where that is not available to him. And that's why context is very important. And it's amazing. A lot of times you meet poor people who doesn't have anything, but they appreciate everything they get. While if you give the same amount of food or the same type of food to another person from another country, he will not even think of eating it, and he will feel miserable. So contexts are important. Our own conditions shape the way we relate to happiness and our expectations and the way we define happiness. That's the first thing, the context and the conditions. And it has a great impact on us. And sometimes the people who are leading these, the human societies don't understand that. One of the known stories in history is that when related to the French Revolution, is that when the French people were revolting, and somebody told the queen, the French queen, the wife of the Louis, the King Louis, who was the king at that time. She was just surprised why people are angry, and then the guy came and told her, one of the people that came, she asked one of the people, tell her what's the problem? He says, well, the masses are angry because they're not getting their bread. Marie Antoinette, I remember him. And then Marie Antoinette said, well, give them biscuits. You see how much she was detached from the reality of those people. Those people did not have bread. They don't know what a biscuit is. So she was living in total totally different reality than the masses, and the context of the way she looked at happiness is definitely different than the context within which those people have been living. And I will talk more later on when I try to explain how we can attain happiness, why that is important. The other thing is a personal thing. So the context, the conditions I lived in, it shaped a lot my view about happiness, and it shapes a lot of the views of any of us when it comes to happiness. The other factor which impacted me, my personal life now, this is more related to me as a person and how I am, what is my psychology. And to the difference of young chaps, young men in my age, I never really cared too much about living my youth in a classical way. I mean, I was not the kind of person who like riding cars or running after girls or celebrating or going to parties. I was very content and very serious young chap, and the joy that I had it on only in intellectual things. I mean, for example, my joy was in reading. I read a lot. I have been very intensive reader, and I read in every area. I do not leave anything, any book, for example, that I could get, I would take. And I remember, as I told, I remember that, for example, that during the high school education in Kuwait, I attended a high school in an area called Fahahil. It's in the southern part of Kuwait. While we lived in Funtas, but the high school was in Fahahil. I went to borrow books from the library, and the guy laughed and says, "Adli, there is no more books to read. You have read everything." Now, I don't claim that this library had millions of books or hundreds of thousands of books. It had maybe a couple of hundreds of books, but it was a library. I mean, and to be able to read that's indication. And my joys were really very intellectual. I liked, for example, watching documentaries on television. Like my brothers and sisters were like fans of looking at movies and seeing things. But I was more interested in science documentaries. I remember one of the great series I was used to look at is the Nova program. Great program, and still up till now. And one of the other things which I like very much is the science fiction. I liked science fiction. It's like as if I was trying to live another reality than the one I had. And I was feeling happy in this context. But also sometimes when you have a different way of looking at life, when your hobbies are different, when your focus on life is different, you also feel lonely because you don't have a lot of people, certainly not in the Arab world, that are focused on these things. Most of the young men in my age in Kuwait were focused on, football. I was playing football, but wasn't really occupying my mind. Friendships, girls, cars, getting so much interested in the tradition, even the Palestinian issue. I mean, some of my friends were really very involved with it, and I never really cared about it. And I know maybe that some people will be irritated about it. I never saw the Palestinian problem as a conflict between the Jews and the Arabs. Never. I only saw it in the context of what is right and what is wrong, and the context of injustice for both parties. And I read a lot about the Jewish history also. Not maybe in that area because there was not much books that talks about the Jewish suffering in the Arab world. And to be honest, the only books I read were written by Palestinians, so it presented only one side of the story. Later on, when I went to the United States and when I came to Sweden, I became interested even to kind of understand the other part of it. And that was good because it emphasizes this thing that I wanted to understand it out of humanistic reflection, not out of conflict between people. And I remember going back, I was very fascinated in science fiction. I read a lot of books that Isaac Asimov has read. I saw Star Wars, the first three episodes. I saw each of them twice. So each of the first three Star Wars episodes, I saw them twice. And I found myself in a world which is really somehow detached from reality around me. And some people get to criticize me for that. They were thinking that, what's happening with Adli. But I don't really regret it because this very deep intellectual interest in things helped me later on shape my own destiny and shape my own understanding of happiness and what makes me happy. And today in Sweden, people who knows me very well get very surprised because they feel that I'm the way I see happiness is different than them. I mean, I don't see happiness in having luxury in life or in having a lot of everything. My philosophy in happiness is completely different, and I'll talk about it in the second part. But these are the two factors which really shaped me in my understanding of what is happiness. And that's why when I discuss happiness, you will see a lot of this reflected in the way I see things. Other people maybe they may define happiness completely different based on their own circumstances and their own mind settings. But I think personally that these two things, the social context you're living in and your own upbringing, are the two major factors that shape your philosophy into happiness and what is happiness. And that these are the two factors which really shape my understanding of happiness. Now I think this part now is finished. Let's talk about the second part, how to attain happiness. The entrance to this discussion is a very simple issue, but it's very important. Is how people see happiness. Some people see happiness in spending huge amount of money in buying cars. The ownership of cars for some people and enjoying riding it, or boats, or spending months on a luxury cruise make them happy. So, or having great house, having a palace. See, those type of people are very focused on the material side of happiness, or the materialistic side of happiness, on things, cars, boats, owning cars, owning boats, owning nice clothes, having the biggest house in the world, spending millions and billions on decorating it. So there is a sector in society which see happiness through that. And there are many examples, for example, of dictators and wives of dictators who had one, the wife of the dictator of Philippines, I think his name Marcos. She had 150 shoes. she see happiness in that, in showing herself. The Shah of Iran, for example, I remember that in the 70s, 60s and 70s, when he used to make huge parties where he spent in a crazy way, millions and millions and millions of dollars, for the clothes and for the setting and for the gold and for the carriage, the golden carriage. He had a golden carriage that carried him, while the Iranians were living in poverty. And actually, that's one of the reasons which led to the revolt against him, is that he was living totally detached from them. But you don't have to be a Shah or a king to think that way. You can be a very simple person, but you're very focused on the materialistic side. And I have friends, people I know, who are not rich. They are struggling in getting by life, to live life. But all the money they get and all the time they get, they spend in these things. Some people find happiness in love and women and excessive sexuality. And this can be men, and they can be women. So they can be, there are women who see their happiness is in having as much as they can have of relationships, fulfilling their lust, for sexual activities, sleeping with many lovers. And the same thing, men also have that. And the history is full of these people. I mean, there is a lot of, I read a book written, it's one of the best sellers written in the United States, full of stories about seduction, how men would pursue any woman they encounter just to, as they say, conquer her. And the same thing, there are women who try to pursue all the men in the world so that they feel satisfied. That's what they like, and that's what for them give them happiness. Is that happiness? Is this the happiness? There are third people who see happiness in spirituality, in living with God, in detaching themselves from the material life and focus on the inner world, focus on their emotions, focus on their conscious, and they feel that the materialistic or the material part of life is not worthy of pursuing. This is a philosophy in life. Some people do that. Some people feel that the material thing, the material in life, and the material things are against happiness. Having them does not make you happy. There are distorted mentality also. People of distorted psychology, they feel their happiness is in being in a violent environment and you know, fighting, killing, and all that. Some of the people who have been in wars before, because of their psychological build-up, they can get so much attached to violence that they wish they don't want to leave the war or the violent actions to normal life. And these are, by the way, these are the worst kind of military personnel because they are living war not out of a necessity or something that is that is evil and that is not desired, but they see it as a manifestation of their manhood and their strength. And usually these kind of people who really lose control of themselves and start acting extremely. So the question is, where we get happiness, how we define happiness. Is it in material things, in luxury, in cars, in boats, in houses? Is it in love and fulfilling sexual life, where somebody enjoying having the company of hundreds of women if he can, thousands of women he can, and the women the same? Is it in gathering money, being so much rich? Is it in practicing violence and living in a military, in a military context? Or is it social? Is it being around people all the time? I think to answer this question, I think the best way, because there is no universal rule in that. I mean, everybody see happiness in different way. Everybody see happiness in different way. Somebody will see it in having multiple relationships with women, having 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 10 different women, enjoying their company, both social and sexual. And some women will think the same way. Others will see it in other things, in money, in prestige. So there is no way to kind of teach people or tell people, how they should define happiness. But there are principles that I think can guide us in defining happiness. Okay. There are principles, core principles, that if we thought of deeply and try to live with when we look at happiness, we probably can attain happiness in its relative meaning, because I don't believe really in our life on earth we will really live that complete happiness. And I don't know whether there is a complete happiness. I don't know whether there is a way for a human being to be totally satisfied. But we can, what one can, what one can do is to raise the level of enjoyment in life, so that most of the time you are really fulfilled and satisfied. And the times where you feel down or you feel unsatisfied are minimum or lower in, lower in intensity. But I have to be frank and say my experience through all these years, and I'm very sure that the experience of most of the people who are hearing me now, tells us that there is no way to stay at that level of happiness or feeling fulfillment all your life. You have, life is ups and downs, and sometimes you feel very content or happy, and some other times you feel, even miserable, and you hate yourself, and maybe you hate your life. But I think if we abided by those, a couple of the important things or principles, if we abide with them, then we can grant for ourselves the closest possible reality to true happiness. And what I'm going to do now, because I'm running out of time, and I need to give each of these elements a real in-depth discussion, because they are very important. What I'm going to do, the rest maybe, the coming 10 minutes, I will enlist them to you. I will say them to you. I will tell you about them in shortcuts shortly, but then I will have another part of this lecture. I will call this part A. I will have another part in which I go in depth of each of them, because understanding each of them give you the tools to live a happy life. And they are centered around four ideas. There may be other things, but these are the ones who are according to my own reflections, because this lecture is about reflections about happiness. According to my reflections, these are the most important elements in seeking true happiness. And as I said, I will just go through them quickly, and then the second part of this lecture, I will go in details, because we really need to cover them in detail. And I will give deep examples of what I mean. Okay? In short, these four principles are as following. The first one of them is balance. And in balance, I mean, is to be in a point between two extremes. And I'll explain that later on. But just one simple thing. Money. Seeking money in life is good, because you need money in order to fulfill other things in your life. But pursuing money to the point where you really cannot accept what the profit you are making can lead you to a point of madness. Sure, you can try yourself to gain as much money as you could, but not for yourself. That's another thing. It's completely different that you're interested in making money because you want to invest and build factories so people can work. And you are interested in making money because you want to buy more cars or more houses. Because at certain level, you reach that balance. I mean, you want money to buy a good car, but once you bought one good car, that's it. That's it. More than that, it's and I tell you the truth, I feel very angry sometimes when when I look at the media, and the media shows. I was looking at one media documentary about the Arab sheikhs in Dubai. One of them has 20 sport cars. This is what I'm saying, excessiveness. This is not this is not seeking money for the good. It's seeking money for your own selfishness. I mean, one car is okay. How many cars you want more? It's the same thing. It's good to have money so that you can have a decent house, 3, 4 rooms. But what will you do with a palace where you have 200 rooms and you're living you and your 2, 3 persons? What do you do with the rest of the rooms? This is what I'm saying, non-balance. And I'm going to talk about non-balance in detail later on in other areas. But that's just an example. So balance is important. You really have to balance your desires and control them so they don't drive you crazy. And spend more time to do other things. Okay? Once you reach certain level, then you should be satisfied and feel happy. You feel happy that you have a good car, you feel happy that you have a good house. But don't sit down all the time and try to impress the others by having more cars and more houses. Doesn't make you more happy, doesn't make you happier. So balance is important, and balance in every areas. Okay? So happiness is not about having all the money in the world and then having nothing achieved in the other areas. Not in social life, not in love life, not in your sexuality, not in your intellectual fulfillment, not in your cultural fulfillment. So you have to balance. You have to balance your life between the extremes. And people who are unhappy are usually people who like extremes, who try to pursue extreme conditions, and that's why they never get happy. The other thing is own conviction, and that's important. If you buy something because you really believe in the value of it and you wish it to have it because it makes you happy, that's something. But if you buy it because the media tells you that this thing is a great thing, and if you don't buy it, you are a less important person than other people, then you're really going to be living miserable. And that's one of the problems that the young generation now we have in the world is suffering greatly, because the marketing hammers that hit them on the head all the time, pumping in them the desire to buy more and more and more and more, can never satisfy their seek for happiness. So be your own self in that thing, and define the things the way you want them, the way you feel you wish them. Don't let the other people impact you in that. So this is another principle: balance and compassion. The third thing is the issue of belonging. And this has to do, the issue of belonging had to do with the fact that as individuals, you need to have a connection to the other people. You need to have a connection. We cannot live as individuals alone. We are in need of other people, and we are in need of the love of the other people, and we are needing the appreciation of other people. And those people who says that if you are alone, you are strong, they really don't understand that issue very strongly. Yes, there are some times where you need to be with yourself and reflect. But we are social animals, as the people say. We are social animals. We are used to be with other people, and we cannot live without having good social life. And we have to have a belonging. And That's very important. And in the first part of this lecture, I tried to clarify to you how at the early stage of my life, I really suffered because of that, because I always felt that I did not have any belonging when I was when I was in Kuwait. The only time I felt I start having belonging is when I settled in Sweden. So belonging is a very, very important component in our life. That's why the social capacities and competences within us are very important, and we really have to be aware of that with ourselves, and we have to train our friends, our children to be socially competent people. The fourth component is inclusion, and with that I mean that the real true happiness is to have all the components that make you happy existing within your life. I mean, if you are focused on your personal success, if you're focused on your education, and you neglect your social life, you neglect your love life, you neglect your sexual life, you will end up being a person, maybe at the top of your career as a scientist, but you'll be lacking a lot of other areas in your life that will make you also happy. And in my experience, most the people who really, I can't call them happy, the people who I got in contact with, and I felt they were happy, are people who has achieved reasonable success in all areas of life. So you find them that, okay, maybe they are not the richest people in the world, but they had made some money. At the same time, they succeeded in fulfilling their sexual life, their love life. And they succeeded in other things. They're living reasonable life. They enjoy their life, but at the same time, there is an inclusion in their life. All the aspects of happiness are there with different degrees, but they are there. Now, with that, I think I will stop there. I'll try to see if I can do the other part tonight so that I finish the subject. Again, this is Adli Abouzeedan greeting you with love and peace. And we meet in the second part, which is part B. And I'll try to do it now. The setting is very nice and the place is cool. There's not a lot of people around me. And it's very nice night, Christmas. So I'll try to do it. See you later.